Chapter 23. About a month after Chesson started kindergarten, Akin took him to the hospital for some routine tests. It was the sort of thing Akin did, like buying hundreds of shares for Chesson on every birthday, or having a children's school fees savings account that he deposited money in every month from the day we got married, or a yearly medical and dental checkup for himself. So I was not surprised when my son came home and proudly showed me the invisible spot that had been pricked on his finger for blood samples. He told me that he had not cried, though the doctor's needle hurt. I kissed the finger and told him he was the bravest boy in the world. He skipped away to Dotun's room to continue to show off. By the time the test results were ready, Akin was in Lagos for a series of meetings that would last 2 weeks. I went to the hospital to get the results. Even then, I hated hospitals. The antiseptic smell that clung to one's nostrils for so long after one left the place. The horrid white dresses and coats most of the workers wore. White, like funeral shrouds. The blood that assaulted your eyes even in places where you least expected it. The screams of pain and loss that spiraled through the corridors. I did not want to be there. "Madame, where is your husband?" Dr. Bello asked before I could sit down. "Away. He's in Lagos at the moment," I said. The office was a cubicle that smelled of iodine. "I would actually prefer to discuss this with him." "What?" "I said I would." "I heard. This is my son, and you won't give me his test results. What do you mean?" "Okay, madame, please sit down," he said, inching back in his seat. "But you must tell your husband to come and see me." "Okay," I said. I knew then that he was not going to tell me everything that he knew. "So, madame, about your son. You know about red blood cells?" I swept through the recesses of my mind for some recollections from biology class. I remembered Mr. Olaya, the biology teacher, whose oversized trousers fell down to his knees on a few occasions, and brightened up his boring class. I remembered nothing about blood cells, red, green, or blue as they might be. I shook my head. "Red blood cells carry oxygen to the—" "Oga, doctor, is anything wrong with my son?" I did not need a biology lesson. Besides, my heart was beating so fast I was sure I would die before the doctor came to the heart of the matter, if he did not get on with it. "Do you know about sickle cell disease?" My heart stopped. My brain stopped. Every organ in my body stopped. The room felt airless. "Yes." "Your son has sickle cell disease." "No," I said. "My God, no!" For the next 24 hours I would mutter it, whisper it. "I'm sorry. But it is not a hopeless condition. There are things you must know. First you need to bring him in for a full exam." The doctor's mouth kept moving, wrapping itself around words that trailed by my ears instead of sliding into them. When he shut his mouth, I stood up and left the office. I dropped the key many times before I could unlock my car. It was 2 p.m. I drove across the road to the Franciscan nursery and primary to pick up my son. He wanted to walk to the car as I led him out of his classroom. I carried him, squeezing him close to me until he yelped. I held on tighter. I kept glancing at him during the ride home, taking my eyes off the road for dangerous periods of time. He was telling me something about school in his still, warbled tongue. He was excited about this thing. He smiled, gestured with his hands and drew shapes in the air. He bounced in his seat as he babbled. I tried to hear what he was saying, to listen to this thing he was so excited about. I heard nothing. I could only see him. His dirty fingernails, dimpled brown cheeks, his yellow shorts and shirt that had grass stains on them again. He was the most beautiful child in the world. I wanted to tuck him back into my stomach and keep him safe from life, from hospitals, from stiff white caps and ward coats. "Mama, "What's wrong?" Chesson asked. Holding up my bunch of keys, he looked irritated. "Nothing," I said, after we got inside. I fed him lunch and helped him with homework. I watched him watch television, gave him dinner and bathed him. I sat on the rugged floor. I watched him watch more television until he fell asleep on the sitting room couch. There were no curfews for him that night. "Why are you crying?" Dotun asked. He had just come into the house. I touched my cheeks. They were wet. When did I start crying? "He's going to die too. Chesson is dying." Nervous laughter bubbled inside me. I clamped my lips together to keep it down. If I laughed, I knew I would laugh through eternity. Dotun hurried to my side, put his ear to Chesson's chest, and sat beside me frowning. "He's fine." His breath smelled like alcohol and cigarettes. "He's a sickler." "Sickler?" The bubbling inside me broke free. Tears flowed, not laughter. It blurred my vision and clogged my nose. The only sounds I could hear were my sobs. They blocked out Chesson's soft snores. I needed to hear those snores. The sound was my life. I crawled to the couch to listen for them, but my sobs became louder, and my eyes were blurred. I could barely see my son. My sobs swallowed Chesson's snores, swallowed me. "It is okay. He's okay." I felt Doton's hand on my neck, stroking, calming. I felt his arms around my waist. I was falling, drowning in my sobs. He was there, holding me in his arms, his mouth whispering that it would be okay. I kissed him to swallow that word, okay, to catch it from his lips and tuck it safely inside me, in the place where Olamide had been ripped from my navel. I wanted the word. I got it. Then I wanted more, needed more, craved more, feverishly more. His tongue, his hands, his hardness deep inside me again. When later his hardness became limp inside me, it still was not enough. I craved more than ever. He rolled off me. I crawled to the couch, placing my face beside my son's. His eyes were closed. Did he see us? How could I have exposed him? Had he seen us? Oh, God! Please let him think it was a dream if he did. Oh, God, please. I sat there until dawn, naked, listening to my son snore, loathing the woman I had become. Chapter 24. I had been taught, and I believed, that education, the best that money could buy, was the greatest thing I could give my son. I was ready to indenture myself if necessary to give Chesson a good education. I revered degrees and the people who held them. The more, the better. The minute I felt he was old enough, I shipped my son off to the best primary school in town. A Catholic school that would teach him the fear of God, too. The day after his diagnosis, I wanted Chesson to stay at home, in bed where I could feed him, fan him, and just watch him. I did not care if for the rest of his life my son was unable to add 2 and 2 to get 4. It did not matter anymore if he never spoke English without the heavy Ijesha accent that refused to quit the tongues of some of his aunts and uncles. I did not care if he never became an engineer or a lawyer or an accountant like his father. If, for the rest of his life, he did nothing but stay alive, that would have been enough for me. At some point in the night, Dotun had thrown a wrapper over me. Then he left the house without telling me where he was going. I did not ask. As sunlight seeped in through an opening in the curtains, I tied the wrapper across my breasts and tapped my son awake. It was time to get him ready for school. I let him go that day, even though I did not want to let him out of my sight, because a mother does not do what she wants. She does what is best for her child. My hand shook on the steering wheel as I drove Chesson to school. I stood in the parking lot and watched him run to his class. My son did not even look my way. I drove to the roundabout, parked in front of the courthouse beside the Awas Palace, and went into the public library. I couldn't find a single volume on sickle cell. I read biology textbooks. I read about blood, red blood cells and hemoglobin. I read the textbooks again and again until it was almost 2, and I had to go and pick up Chesson. I moved him out of his room that night and reinstated him in the room I shared with Akin. He would sleep beside me, but I could watch him vigilantly. Dotun came to me on a Saturday night, a night when he should have been out as usual, drinking at Ijesha Sports Club on Akin's membership. He did not knock. He just walked in, as though from the other side of the door he could see that I was sitting up in bed with my back against the wall. I had not seen him since the night he teased my body to orgasm after orgasm, while my son slept on the couch. His brother was still away, due back in a few days. Dotun's eyes were bloodshot. The irises stood out against the redness. "Let's talk," he said, standing by the half-open door. "Please go away." I did not want to talk to him. He sat near my feet. He looked sorry, guilty, and a little afraid. He could not even meet my eye. Instead, he focused on my forehead, as though it was a television screen. I never imagined that the loud-mouthed Dotun knew the meaning of guilt. I expected some remorse. I was his brother's wife, after all. But the way the sides of his mouth dipped towards his chin suggested shame. Shame was something I had never associated with him. He always appeared above it with his easy smile, his inappropriate remarks, and the way he picked his nose and scratched his balls in public. "What we did will not happen again," I said. I don't know what came. The devil, Hakim." It was the first time I would hear Dotun say his brother's name just like that. Just the name, stripped of the honor due to his older brother, unprefixed with bros or broda. Not broda mi, not Ayobami or bros Akin, just Akin, as if somehow my husband had become his equal in age at some point during the week. Perhaps while Dotun lay with me on the sitting-room rug. I leaned forward and grabbed his chin. "Your brother will never, ever know about this." The downturned lips were now trembling, and it looked as though he would cry. I hissed, gripping his chin harder until my nails dug into his skin. "Stop shaking like waist beads, Ojare." Perhaps it was guilt that loosened his tongue, a need to justify the desire that leapt into his eyes the moment my hand touched his chin, a way to excuse the naked need he struggled to swallow. Perhaps he assumed that I knew the things he was going to say, the secrets that Akin had hidden from me while carefully feeding my insecurities. I did not want to believe Dotun, but I could not resist the truth, could not deny his words out loud and look like a fool. Dotun kept apologizing. I smiled and told him it was okay. He finally shut his mouth and retreated from the room with his head hung like a condemned criminal. His words were like a blow to my head. They made me dizzy and disoriented. I mumbled them to myself, trying to piece his sentences together again. I tried to fit it into the picture I had of my marriage, of my relationship with Akin, from the moment I laid my eyes on him. The past flipped itself open like a spooky family album, revealing one familiar picture after the other, highlighting the things standing in plain view which I had never seen. Things I had refused to see. Chapter 25. I met Akin when I was in my penultimate year at the University of Ife. That night, I had gone to the Oduduwa Hall to watch a movie with some boy who paid for my ticket and bought suya for me to eat during the show. I was seeing this boy almost every day at the time. I saw Akin in the ticket queue in front of us. He was smiling at something the girl with him had said. His lower lip was a deep pink that stood out against his brown skin. I felt like touching the lip to find out if he was wearing lipstick. A feeling came from some place deep in my stomach, some place that I had not known existed before that night. Inside the hall, I was a seat away from him. The girl he came with was seated in the chair between us, but she did not exist that night. She was just thin air. Even the chair she sat on did not exist. I could feel Akin's presence beside me, as though he was right next to me. I ate the suya, chewing chunk after peppery chunk of beef, without pausing to drink from the bottle of soft drink my thoughtful date had brought along.
"Wow, you are tough. Eating all that pepper. My mouth would have been on fire by now,"
Date Boy had said. I glanced at him just before the lights went out to signal the beginning of the movie, trying to remember who he was and why on earth he was talking to me. I tried to keep my eyes on the screen. It was impossible. My eyes were drawn to Akin like metal to a magnet. It was just not possible to resist the attraction. He was watching me too, in the dim glow of the light from the screen. I tore my eyes away every time, afraid I would drown in his steady gaze. The movie finished too soon. I stood up and dragged myself after Date Boy, still struggling to remember his name, keeping my head down so I could steal a glance at Akin without turning my head. Date Boy was going to a lecture hall to spend the night studying. I reassured him that it would not be necessary for him to escort me to my room. He headed towards the Faculty of Arts, and I went in the direction of Moremi Hall. Akin had followed me. I felt his hand on my arm once my feet hit the pavement.
"Do you need a ride?"
he asked. "You want to carry me on your back?" He laughed.
"That would be great. My car is parked in front of the hall. I can bring it here, or we can go and pick it up together. But if you prefer to ride on my back, it belongs to you."
"No, thank you." I had been drooling over him all night, but my brains hadn't fallen out of my mouth yet. It was past midnight, and he could have been a kidnapper.
"I'm Akinyele, and everyone calls me Akin,"
he said. My feet, for some reason, became rooted to the ground. "Yejide." He scratched his eyebrow.
"Yejide.
Lovely name." I was suddenly incapable of producing more than one word at a time. "Thanks."
So, you noticed I couldn't watch the movie because of you."
"You want me to give you a refund?" "Ah!" My tongue was back. He smiled.
"I wouldn't mind. Not Monisha. I'd like your room number. I want to see you again. Visit you."
"Will you be coming with your girlfriend?"
Oh, Bisade. She was my girlfriend, but it's over now."
I bent my head to hide a smile. "Since when?"
"Since I saw you. Tonight."
"Does Bisade know this?" He scratched the tip of his nose.
"She'll know soon."
F101, Moremi. My room number." The words came out of my mouth of their own accord. He rubbed his palms together and smiled.
"Come with me to my car,"
he said. I followed him to his car, the Volkswagen Beetle that would become mine after we got married. He held the door open while I got in.
"You know what they say about a Yoruba man opening the door for his wife?"
he asked when he got in. "What?"
"Well, when a Yoruba man opens the door for his wife, either the wife is new or the car is new."
"Oh," I said, like a moron.
"F101,
he said, switching off the car's engine. We were in Moremi Hall's car park. I nodded, trying to tear my eyes away from his lips. I failed. Instead, I felt my own lips part. The car was silent. I could hear myself breathing through my mouth. I could have removed his hand when it touched my chin, tilting my face until our eyes met, his eyes questioning, silently seeking permission. I did not remove his hand. His force field pulled me closer. His lips touched mine. It was my first kiss. Of course, I had swallowed saliva from the mouths of a few boys before then, had had my lips uncomfortably crushed, and wondered why there were so many people under the trees at different points on campus, mangling each other's lips every night. I understood why when I felt Akin's lips on mine. His lips stopped time. His tongue teased mine until it danced with his. When he drew back, I could not remember my name or anything else. "I'll check on you tomorrow," he said. I staggered out of the car and up the steps that led into Moremi Hall. He showed up the next day, sat on my bed, leaned back until his head rested on the wooden panel that ran along the side of the wall. He looked at home, as comfortable as though he came every day and leaned back on my bed like that. I felt awkward. He said nothing, just looked at me with a smile dancing on his lips. I was overwhelmed with the urge to fill every silence with words. Silence, to me, was a void in the universe that could suck us all in. It was my assignment to block this deadly void with words and save the world. I told him about myself without him asking. He sat up, leaned forward, took in every word. I began to feel as though I was elucidating eternal truths. Akin had the ability to listen to people, to focus his eyes and ears in a way that made you feel whatever you were saying was important, even crucial. It was 10 p.m., too soon, but he had to leave the hostel along with other male visitors. As I walked him to his car, I realized that he had spent 4 hours in my room, and I still did not know anything about him, apart from his name. Yet somehow, I felt as though I knew him. I would learn later that Akin could keep himself neatly folded in while he drew out other people. He was the kind of person that many claimed as a dear friend. Many of those people did not even know him, but they never knew that they did not know him. It made me feel special, this awareness that Akin never really allowed anyone to know him. As we grew closer, and he became the one who talked to me non-stop for 4 hours, I felt as though I was being ushered into the most exclusive club. A club that only Dotun and I were allowed into. I would not realize until much later that Akin could talk for hours without saying anything, and with that skill, he had managed to make me feel like part of the inner circle. I told Akin about my plan. I made the plan the day I started secondary school. Iya Abike, my father's youngest and favorite wife at the time, had looked me up and down in my new school uniform and told me that there was no need for me to go to school because I would end up a whore like my mother, pregnant by a man who would never marry her. None of the other wives said anything, and I knew that Iya Abike, bolstered by her status as the favorite wife, had spoken for all of them, sure that she could get herself out of trouble with my father if I decided to report what she said. Until then, I had wanted to train to become a hairdresser with a local stylist after secondary school. I decided that minute that I would go to university, that I would stay a virgin until I got married and have the blood-stained white cloth sent as proof to my father on my wedding night. Even back then, it was a tradition that only a few people followed, but I was determined to go with the practice and shove it in my stepmother's faces when the time came. In my mind, the plan would be a declaration, a condition that I laid on the table for any man who wanted to be with me, a take-it-or-leave-it kind of thing. But with Akin, I pleaded. Although we had only kissed a couple of times before he asked me to be his girlfriend, I knew already that I was at the mercy of the pinkness of his mouth. He agreed to wait. The waiting was pointless. My father died shortly before our wedding. My stepmothers found an excuse not to attend the church ceremony, although they could not wriggle out of the traditional wedding, since it was held in the family compound. When I went back home after the wedding reception to wait for a delegation from Akin's family to come for me, the house was empty. There was no female relative to accompany me to Ilesha. No younger sibling to keep me company on my first night as a wife. It was as though I was not just an orphan. It was as if I had no relatives at all. The night Dotun walked into my room without knocking, told me the things in plain view that I had been blind to, before leaving with his head hanging like that of a condemned criminal. I felt the loneliness of my wedding day again. I woke Chesson up. "Tell me about school," I asked him. "Is it time for school, Mama?" He was still drowsy. "No, I just need to talk to you." I needed to hear his voice. This person who was all mine, my son. I belonged to him in an unchangeable, irreplaceable way. I was his mother. I knew him. He could not betray me in the ways Akin had. He could not deceive me yet, and even if he did, I would always be his. "I want to sleep."
Sit here.
I pulled him into my lap and hugged him tight. "Tell me, who is your friend in class?" "Leave me alone," he protested, wresting himself from me with surprising force. He rolled over to the other end of the bed and dropped off to sleep. Loneliness wrapped itself around me like a shroud. Chapter 26. The day that Yejide told me that Chesson had sickle cell disease, I was in a hotel room in Lagos, somewhere in Ikeja. I would have left for Ilesha immediately if I could have, but I still had business meetings scheduled for the next few days. I assumed when Yejide said that Dr. Bello wanted to see me once I returned to Ilesha, that he wanted to discuss treatment options. Didn't know enough about the disease to be as scared as she sounded on the phone. I trusted in medical science, believing it could fix Chesson if I spent enough money, and I was ready to spend all I had. I went to the hospital to meet with Dr. Bello on the day I arrived in Ilesha. I didn't even go home first, drove straight to the hospital once I got into town. He was just getting back from the clinic when I arrived at his office. "You don't remember me?" he asked as he unlocked the door to his office. I tried to remember where we had met, but I couldn't. "No," I said, following him into the office, sitting in the chair he pointed to. He removed his ward coat and slung it on the back of a chair. "I came to your bank for a loan last year. You were so helpful," he said. "You are sure you don't remember?" "I'm sorry, but no," I said. He rolled up his shirt sleeves. It's okay. Your madam told me that you are in Lagos. How was the trip?" "It was great, really good, thanks for asking." He took a deep breath. "I'm guessing that your madam also told you that Chesson has sickle cell disease." I nodded, waiting for him to tell me what could be done, to arm me with knowledge, give me a list of rules we would need to keep. "I will get straight to the point, sir. I think you need to have a discussion with your madam." He took off his glasses and began to clean the lenses with a handkerchief. "There were some, discrepancies in the results of the genotype test we conducted for your son." I moved forward in my seat, eager for him to go on, imagining for a brief, beautiful moment that he'd discovered an error in the test results since Yejide had left his office, that he was about to tell me our son was healthy after all. "So let me start by explaining how sickle cell disease works. It's an inherited disorder, and you need two parents who have at least one sickle cell gene before a child can get it. So, for instance, your madam is AS, and that means she has the sickle cell gene, but because she has just one of the genes, she doesn't have the disease, but is a carrier. And that means she can pass on the gene to her children, but her children can only have the sickle cell disease if the other parent, the man, is also a carrier.
So you need 2 people with the AS genotype, or one with the AS genotype and the other with the SS genotype, before the possibility of even having a child who is SS arises. Does that make any sense? I nodded. And now, here is the discrepancy I was talking about. I took a look at your files after Chesson's results came in from the lab, and here is what I discovered. Your madame is the only one with the AS genotype, sir. You are AA, which means that your child could never have sickle cell disease. Sir, I am telling you this as a man to another man, and because you were so helpful when I came in for that loan. You understand what I mean. So, I can tell you with all certainty that Chesson cannot be your son. My limbs went limp. I covered my face with my hands and prepared an expression to meet the doctor's sympathetic gaze. Do you mean this? I said. Do you mean what you are saying? You mean that woman has been cheating on me? Are you serious? You mean this? Oh my God, I'm going to kill her. I swear to God. I allowed my voice to rise to its highest pitch and pounded my fist on the doctor's table. Calm down, sir. You need to handle this like a man, okay? Please, calm down. Be a man, sir. Be a man. I made sure I seemed angry enough to Dr. Bello, behaved the way I imagined a man would when discovering that a child wasn't his. I punched a wall, yelled and slammed the door as I left the office. But I knew Chesson was my son. I loved him. I was planning for his future. Had bought shares in his name. I often thought of the day I'd buy him his first bottle of beer. Could hardly wait to teach him how to play table tennis at the sports club. I knew I was the one who would do all those things. Nobody else was going to do them. There are things scientific tests cannot show. Things like the fact that paternity is more than sperm donation. I knew Chesson was my son. There was no test result that could change that. Besides, I already knew that Dotun was the sperm donor. That was how I thought about what he did for me. Sperm donation. I knew Dotun would never claim he was Chesson's father, which is the reason I went to him when I eventually accepted the fact that I needed someone else to get my wife pregnant. Brother me, what is this thing you are saying? Dotun said, after I laid out my plan. You need to spend just a weekend. Next weekend, she'll be ovulating. Yejide, she agreed to this thing you are saying? He looked as if he was about to vomit all over the green rug on his sitting room floor. Yes. Truth is, I hadn't discussed it with Yejide, but I just wanted him to agree to the plan so I could go to bed and forget the discussion. He got up, went to stand by a window, stared into a black night unlit by stars or streetlights. I couldn't see his face clearly. The candle that stood on the center table was burning out fast. Brother Akin, with all due respect but this thing you are saying is nonsense. What if... No, I can't do it. I won't. It's wrong. He turned to face me when he said this, slashing the air with his hands the way he did when agitated. I wanted to laugh. Dotun? Wrong? What the hell? He dated a mother and her daughter at the same time. He had a string of girlfriends on the side. One of them was even his poor wife's colleague at work. He was telling me about wrong? I'm not asking you to rape her. Damn it. Just once, get her pregnant and that's it. I've told you my problem. Do you want me to beg? It is an abomination. She's your wife. She's your wife. You want me to sleep with my brother's wife? My elder brother's wife? No, I can't. There has to be another way. Dotun, you are the only person I can come to. You are the only brother I have. Do you want me to call a stranger? He hit several surfaces. His thigh, the wall, the blank television screen. His burst of conscience surprised me. I hadn't expected him to jump at the idea, but somehow I'd never thought he'd be so torn, so afraid. But of what? Was he not Dotun? So, she gets pregnant. Won't you want another child? If we arrange things well, 1 weekend will do for each child. All things being equal, 3 kids are okay. He looked me in the eye, searched my face and slumped into a chair. You've thought about this. You've been thinking about this for a long time. His voice accused me of many things.
I'm doing this for her.
Even then, I can't. Maybe an outsider would be better.
Why did I tell him the story? Maybe a part of me knew that it was Yejide's pain that could move him, had intuited in the hugs and gazes that lingered too long that if my brother had met her first, this story could have been different. Perhaps because I knew, even then, that what Dotun was afraid of, what he wouldn't admit to himself, was that with Yejide, it could never be just sex for him, because a part of him had always wanted her. I told him about the miracle baby, the call from the hospital, the antenatal nurse begging me to come and get my wife. Told him about the day I went to the antenatal class, described the wounded look in Yejide's eyes as I tried to escort her out of the class, the way she clung to a metal pole on the hospital corridor, not removing her hands to retie the wrapper that dropped as I tried to pull her away. I talked about it until he could see her, in just her Ankara blouse and lace underskirt, the wrapper lying at her feet like a snake's discarded skin. I told him how she stayed that way until the antenatal class was over, and the pregnant women left for their homes, some slinking by her in hurried steps, others turning off to take another route as they approached her.
Is she going mad?
He asked.
She has started seeing a psychiatrist. She's okay right now, but she could wake up tomorrow morning and say she has morning sickness.
I can't! He stood up, went back to the window. Dotun, I'm talking about you having sex with Yejide, my beautiful wife. I swallowed. It felt like forcing an iron fist down my throat. My brother shifted from one foot to the other. I could see in the way his hips thrust towards the window reflexively that he was already in Elisha. In our bedroom, fucking my wife.
It's an abomination.
So advise me, what do I do?
Brother me, does Yejide know you are here right now?
She knows I'm in Lagos.
Dotun, why are you prolonging this discussion? Why would it be different from all the girls you go around with? It would just be sex 5 times at the most, and you are done.
It would just be sex. He spoke slowly, as though testing the truth of the words by speaking them. Chapter 27. Akin was irritated by Chesson's presence in our bed, diagnosis or no diagnosis.
I just want to be able to touch you anytime, anyhow I want. And this child is old enough. He will remember what we are doing,
he said. I wanted to laugh in his face. What were we doing? Chesson's health is our priority now, not touching, I said. He sulked, but I did not care. I did not want his hands on my body again, ever. His deception was cutting me open, but I did not have the time to deal with it or confront him. Chesson needed me, needed everything in me that could will him to live. Fighting Akin over Dotun's revelations would have been an unnecessary waste of energy. After Chesson was diagnosed, I'd pulsed with adrenaline. I spent my days reading photocopied medical journals I borrowed from Chesson's doctor. My head was filled with images of hemoglobin and sickle-shaped cells. I learned how to use a thermometer to check Chesson's temperature, and briefly considered training to be a nurse. The only thing that stopped me was that there would be little time out of the training schedule to actually care for my son. Many times I woke up in the dead of the night sweating, unable to remember what nightmares had propelled me upright in bed. After a few months, I began to breathe again. Chesson was as healthy as ever, still dangling himself upside down from the banister and running around the house for no particular reason. He was also doing well at school, and even placed second in his class. The first crisis took my breath away. Chesson told me he had a headache when he returned from school. I administered paracetamol syrup and put him to sleep on the sitting room couch. He did not respond when I tried to wake him up for dinner. I pleaded with God in my heart as Akin drove us to the hospital. Please, 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 I begged. I could not wrap my mind around anything more coherent. The car sped on and on. In the corner of my mind, some demon assured me that we were speeding away from the hospital and not towards it. Faster, faster, drive! Do you know where we are going? I yelled at Akin. I threatened Chesson. You, this child, I will kill you if you die. I stumbled out of the car before Akin stopped it and ran towards the nearest building. A nurse tried to take Chesson from me. I held on to him, still screaming. "Let him go," Akin said. I let the nurse take him. A ward attendant blocked our way when we tried to follow her. I screamed threats after the woman, the pain I would inflict on her if anything happened to my baby. I paced the corridor. I was alone. Akin was somewhere filling in forms to admit him. I pleaded with God again. Then I threatened. I promise you I will. In that moment, I hated God. I wished I could see God and rip his heart out. What had I done to him anyway? Didn't I deserve some happiness? My mother, Olamide, and now Chesson. The days passed slowly, each minute pregnant with hope, each second tremulous with tragedy. Mommy came to the hospital and sat by me all night. Before she left the next morning, she reminded me that I had to be strong because I was a mother. I sat by his bed, looking, waiting, searching for the faintest sign that he had decided to return to me. There was no sign. I was afraid to touch him, afraid that my touch might stress him and careen him into the unknown, away from me forever. By the third day, I was on my knees praying to him in muttered words only I could hear. "Ṣàánú malo. Ọmọ mi. Jọ̀ọ́ nítorí Ọlọ́run. Ṣàánú dúró tì mí. Have mercy on me. Don't go, please. Stay with me." I ran to the bathroom and back. I did not eat or bathe. He woke up on the 6th day. I screamed for the doctor even though she was at the next bed on ward round when Chesson woke up. "Mommy, smelling bad." Those were the first words my son spoke as he recovered. I remember them to this day. My mother-in-law came visiting about a week after Chesson was discharged. She waved away Akin's greetings and shook her head when I offered her a drink. "This is Abiku," Mommy said, as soon as she settled into a chair. "I have been thinking about this child's sickness since I came to check on him in the hospital." "It's just a sickness, Mommy. They have a name for it and treatment. It is not Abiku," Akin said. Mommy snorted. "Do they have a cure? Can they cure him of this?" "They can treat it," Akin said. "Do they have a cure?" "No. See? You shake your head. That means this is Abiku. I have seen a lot of them in my day. This is just how it is. Look, these children, they have made a promise in the spirit world to die young. Let me tell you, their ties to the spirit world are stronger than steel. You think your hospitals can help you with that? We must do something." Akin held his forehead as though a migraine was setting in. "It's just a disease, Mommy, and there is treatment. There's nothing spiritual about it." "So you went to the white man's school, and I didn't. But we have seen enough of you school types to know schooling is not wisdom. For many of you it is foolishness, like settling for treatment when there is a cure." "Mommy, are you saying I'm a fool?" I could tell that Akin's irritation was turning to anger. Mommy gave him a stare that said her response was a resounding yes, and turned to me. "Talk to me, Jare, my daughter. What do you think? We should just fold our hands against our bodies and watch the doctors treat what they cannot cure when we have another route we can take?" "Another route, my daughter? The whole world knows there are many routes into any marketplace. But the white man has deceived some of you, told you his way is the only way." She paused and glared at Akin, who was staring at the ceiling. "Some have been foolish enough to believe him without investigating for themselves. God save them all." "Say what you like, Mommy," Akin said. "We are not taking my son to any of your crooks." "Look at this Akin that doesn't know what pregnancy feels like. See the way he is talking. My daughter, don't mind him. You are the one that will decide, because you know what it is like to kneel in labor. Do you think our people simply say that there is no God like a mother? Of course you do. No one bothers to complete the saying these days. Here, Chesson, pull your ears and listen to the full proverb. There is no God like a mother, because nobody can support a child like she would when that child is in anguish.
It is you who will decide for your son. Not this Akin that wants to cure Abiku with a syringe.
Dotun came in then, reeking of alcohol.
Mommy! Here you are!
Chesson had wriggled free from his grandmother's knees. He pulled at the hem of my dress.
What is Abiku?
It is a game, I said.
Can we play Abiku?
No, it is a bad game, I said. Dotun was weaving around Moomi, singing nursery rhymes.
Ba ba blah sheep, ba ba blah sheep. Why is my son bleating like a goat?
Moomi asked.
He is singing a song, an English song,
Akin replied. Moomi sighed and shook her head.
I can jump like a frog. I can jump like a frog.
This time, Dotun sang in Yoruba, and Moomi needed no interpreter.
Akin, don't watch me like this. Do something about your brother.
Although my husband had nothing new to say, he snapped to and steered the conversation away from Chesson's health to Dotun's joblessness, and what he was doing and planning to do about it. Dotun leapt around our sitting room like a child, singing various nursery rhymes. Chesson followed him, singing along.
Who is in the garden?
A little fine girl.
Can I come and see her?
No.
Dotun stopped in front of me, and in his drunken haze pulled me up from my chair towards himself with one hand and grabbed my breast with the other. I tried to pull away, but he held on. Akin pushed him, and Dotun collapsed into a seat, laughing.
Ah! Abomination!
Moomi cried, placing a hand over her left breast as if to keep her heart from bursting through her skin.
It is the alcohol,
Akin said.
My wife, please don't be angry,
Moomi said.
She is not angry. It is the alcohol, isn't it?
Akin asked me. A muscle kept flexing in his jaw as though he was chewing his teeth. His hands were balled into fists, and their veins stood out. His gaze stayed on me, even though his mother was saying something to him. He was waiting for me to answer, to assure him that it had really been just the alcohol. I lowered myself into a chair, thinking he had no right to be angry, not if the things Dotun had told me were true. But I did not have enough energy in me to care too much about how Akin felt. Chesson was all that mattered. My son was all I had left. Chapter 28. I picked him up from the Franciscan school sickbay. One of the nurses on duty was also a nun. She went to the hospital with me, holding my son and whispering prayers that I did not know. The only lines I recognized were from the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Her words were soon drowned by his groaning. He writhed as though he was seeking a way to escape his own body. The groans were filled with too much pain for one so tiny. He was hoarse by the time we drove across the road into Wesley Guild. The nun held him and followed me as I raced ahead of her into the ward. The nurse on duty recognized me and led us to a bed immediately. The nun stayed with us, saying her prayers at the foot of the bed. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. I stood as close to the bed as I could. I wanted to take in the sound of his voice, absorb the unspeakable pain it bore. I had heard it too many times. It had seared my mind and played in my dreams. His eyes were shut, and he was curled into a tight ball that the doctor and nurses tried to prise open. He whimpered my name. Mama! Mama! Oh, Mama! Each broken sound was a nail in my heart. I wanted desperately to stop his pain in any way possible, but I couldn't. And forgive us our trespasses.
Mrs. Ajayi, please hold his hand.
I inched closer to the bed. His hand gripped mine with pain-induced strength that crushed my knuckles together. I welcomed the pain in my hand, aware that it was only a tip of what he was feeling. I hoped that by holding me, he could transfuse his agony into my body and be free from it. I remember this time because the nun went with us to the hospital. Chesson was being admitted to hospital so often now that one visit was hard to distinguish from the other. The nun in her beige habit makes this memory stand out. Soon, the doctors asked me and the nun to wait outside, and we joined the group of sitting and pacing relatives, companions in the valley of the shadow of death, waiting for someone in white to come and tell us our fate. The nun held my hand, led me to a wooden bench and sat beside me. So we waited. The nun prayed, and I thought about how much I was to blame. There was little room to escape the guilt I felt about Chesson's sickness, and I did not even try. The way I saw it, 50% of his pain was my fault. I had made him sick. I had passed on my sickle cell gene to him. My body had created the fault in his. I did not shirk from the despair, did not hide myself from his pain. It was only fair that I should share in what I had caused. I refused to entertain the possibility that he would die. I did not give up on Chesson. I held on to him in my heart. I convinced myself that he would survive it all. The pain that made him scream until he was hoarse, the injections and painkillers being pumped into his body. I did not once wish that death would release him from his suffering. My only prayers were that he would survive it all and live. The doctors had told us that there were people who lived long and full lives in spite of SCD, and as far as I was concerned, there was no reason why my son would not be one of them. I convinced myself that he would live because he deserved to, he wanted to. He was so brave, so hungry for life in spite of everything. But it was also because I knew already that I could not bear to lose another child. I could not even think about it. I knew I would not survive the loss. The nun visited Chesson every day during the 2 weeks that he spent in the hospital. On the day he was finally discharged, Akin tried to carry him when we left the ward, but he scampered down and skipped ahead of us towards the car. He laughed and stretched his little arms forward as he tried to catch a red butterfly that was flying in front of him. Chapter 29.
Mr. Ajayi? It's Mr. Ajayi, right? Okay, good. The doctor said, he is responding to treatment now. You should be able to see him in an hour or so. I'll let you know when you can. Please excuse me.
I went back to the corridor, where I'd been sitting on a bench with Yejide. She was pacing the floor with her hands clasped around her large belly.
Oh yeah, come and sit down. There's no problem.
I put an arm around her shoulder, led her to a bench.
I met one of Chesson's doctors on my way back from the toilet. He says Chesson is responding to treatment. We should be able to see him soon. So just relax.
Okay.
Thank God,
she sighed and slumped against me.
The baby kicked again when you left.
I put my hands on her belly. She chuckled.
Sorry, she has stopped already.
Not fair.
I moved closer to her so an old man could sit next to me on the bench.
Will you go home to have some breakfast? I'll wait here.
Lie. Never. I'm not going anywhere without my son.
He'll be fine. Don't worry about it. You need to eat, Yejide.
I got up.
Let me get you something from those food vendors outside the gate. What do you want?
Maybe bread.
Be back in a minute.
Yejide and I had woken up during the night to find Chesson writhing in pain. We'd ended up in the hospital before 3 a.m. The sun was just coming up as I went outside the hospital's pedestrian gate. Most of the wooden stalls that clustered close to the entrance were empty, and I had to walk towards Ijofi Street before I found a woman who sold 2 fresh loaves of bread to me. Yejide was still eating when the doctor I'd seen earlier approached us. We stood up as he came closer.
Please come with me. I'd like to talk to you, he said.
Yejide dropped her bread on the bench, and we began walking up the corridor with the doctor. The doctor stopped, glancing at Yejide's belly.
No, I meant just your husband. Ma, please go and sit down. I need to talk to just him. Alone.
Just him, Kay. You don't need me,
Yejide said.
No, madam. I just need to ask your husband a few questions. He'll be back with you soon. Yejide shuffled back towards the bench as the doctor and I walked up the corridor. I could still hear the sound of her feet when the doctor and I stopped at the end of the corridor. Mr. Ajayi, how do I say this? He stared at the floor for what must have been a full minute. When he looked up, his eyes were red. This is my first call in pediatrics. I just became a doctor last year. I don't specialize in pediatrics. My senior registrar, the SR on call, was there too when we were fighting for Cheson's life. But she has gone to the toilet again. Dr. Bulu, that's her name. I think she may have diarrhea. Maybe we should wait for her. I'm so sorry. What are you saying? He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand and sighed. We lost him. I'm so sorry. We lost him. To this day, I think about the way he said they'd lost him, as though there was still a chance of getting him back, of finding him hidden in a filing cabinet. I went back to Yejide. He is getting better, I said. When can we see him? Not yet. They want to observe him for 2 more hours before we see him. She frowned. 2 hours? Why did he want to talk to you alone? Do you have a wedu at home? A wedu? She scratched her head. Yes, why? He wants us to bring a wedu stew for him so that... because when... it's nutritious and he thinks it will help him. Oh yeah, let's go home. For what? Yejide, the wedu, now. We are not going to see him for 2 more hours anyway. Let's go quickly so that the stew will be ready when they let us in. She pursed her lips. As we walked to the parking lot, she kept glancing back at the ward Cheson had been admitted to. As we drove home, I thought about the best way to tell Yejide our son was dead. I knew before we drove out of the hospital it would be harder than anything I'd ever done. Yejide put a hand on my knee when I parked in front of our house. You haven't said anything since we left the hospital. What is wrong? What did that doctor say? It must have been something in my eyes, in the way I looked at her while I tried to come up with something plausible to say. It's Cheson, Abi. That the wedu thing is a lie. He just wanted me out of the hospital. What happened? She gripped my knee. Abi, my son is dead. I couldn't lie. Couldn't tell the truth. Didn't have the energy to say a word. I just stared at her. Aki, Cheson is dead. Abi. I couldn't even nod. I was weak, exhausted. I didn't even try to hold her when she put her forehead against the dashboard and began to cry. Mommy came to ask for permission the next day. She offered her condolences briskly and sat beside Yejide on our bed. Just a few marks on his body. She lowered her voice, and a little whipping. Mommy. I said no. There is no need. I couldn't believe what she was saying, was within an inch of telling her to leave my house. Next time, we will be sure. We will know for sure when Yejide has another baby. I said no. Can't you hear me? I knew the tradition. There was no need for her to explain it to me. You whip the Abiku's body so that the next time he is reborn, the marks on the newborn would tell you that the dead child had returned to torment its mother. I didn't want my son ritually scarred because I didn't believe he was some malicious spirit child. I'd never believed in Abikus at all. Abiku? Abiku! I said it and said it until my mouth was bleeding. But you said, what does an old woman know? You are a man, Akin, just a man. What do you know? Tell me. Have you been pregnant? Have you held a child to your breast and watched it die? All you know is stupid English. What do you know? Yejide, talk to me, Ojare. It is your permission that I need. Can they do it? Just a few marks, so we will know for sure. Yes, Yejide said.
covering herself with a blanket.
Ejide, what rubbish! You can't let them do this.
Please, I want to sleep, she said. Go away, all of you, please. Go away. Chapter 30. There were no incisions on my daughter's body. No lacerations, no scars, not one single lash mark from a previous life. Still they named her Rotimi, a name that implied that she was an Abiku child who had come into the world intending to die as soon as she could. Rotimi. Stay with me. It was the name my mother-in-law had chosen, a name that until then I had thought was given to boys alone. I wondered if Moomi had picked Rotimi because it was mutable. If the right prefix was added later on, it would sound normal, stripped of the tortured history that Abiku names announced. Rotimi could easily become Ola Rotimi. Wealth stays with me. There was no getting around other alternatives like Maku, don't die, or Kukoi, death, reject this one. I checked every inch of her body, even her palms and the soles of her feet. Nothing. I stared at her smooth, unscarred cheeks and thought of Chesson, his body beaten, marked forever. I wished I could rub the marks off with my fingertips, the way I had once rubbed his tears into his skin until they disappeared. First I would have had to find out where they had buried him. If they had buried him. If his body had not simply been left in a bush far away from the city, far away from any place where human beings lived. There was no way for me to ever know. Moomi did not answer my questions. She refused to say a word about Chesson at all. It was as though to her he was a bad dream that should quickly be forgotten, and definitely not spoken about. Like me, Akin was not allowed around Chesson's dead body or funeral, and since my husband had not agreed to the marks in the first place, he did not go to Ayeso the day the marks were put on Chesson's body. The day Rotimi was named, in a quiet ceremony that included only 10 people, I took off my gold necklace just before the ceremony began and twisted it around her neck 3 times to form a multi-layered necklace. The pendant, a crucifix, lay hidden beneath her white dress. This was the only thing I did for my daughter that day. My mother-in-law took care of bathing and dressing Rotimi. She even held her neck while I breastfed her. Moomi made an effort to be kind, but I could sense her irritated impatience with me, even though I was far away, nursing my Chesson, still trying to keep him alive, battling the blurry pictures that kept blocking my view of him. Moomi was another blurry picture, an awkward image that held my face in her hands and dragged her hands across my cheeks to catch tears. Only I was not crying. I was just sleepy, eager to curl up in bed and dream of Olamide and Chesson.
You must be strong for this child,
she said, over and over, until I covered my ears with my hands. She left our house the same day, even though there was no other grandchild for her to help look after.
She is your daughter. You take care of her. You are not dead,
she said, before walking out to meet Akin at the car. There was more she had to say. It was there in the anger and contempt in her eyes. The eyes that condemned me for grieving for too long, for being too weak to be a mother to my newborn child, for dwelling with the dead. I did not care what she thought, or what her roomy eyes were screaming at me. After all, she was just another blurry photo blocking my view. I was glad to see her go, until Rotimi began to scream, and I had to get up from the bed to pick her up from the cot. Moomi would have done that if she had waited. She would have rocked the baby to silence, while I dreamt. I did not know what to do with the screaming girl whom we were already pleading with every day, every moment we called her name. Rotimi, stay with me. I closed my eyes when she suckled at my breast, careful not to make eye contact with her. I had the washerwoman come in every other day to wash the baby things. I was not strong enough to love when I could lose again. So I held her loosely, with little hope, sure that somehow she too would manage to slip from my grasp. I let her have the gold necklace I'd put on her for her naming ceremony. And whenever we left the house, I wrapped it around her neck, placing the crucifix beneath her cloth, next to her skin, like a talisman. It happened on a Monday morning, while Rotimi was sleeping. She did that a lot. She hardly ever moved an inch in her sleep. On that Monday morning, she was not too hot or too cold. Her breathing was faint but sure, and sometimes she chortled in her sleep. Was it because of her that things happened the way they did? Because I wanted to stay in the room with her, and could not be downstairs in Dotung's room? Sometimes I think that if I had been in Dotung's room downstairs, I would have heard the car pull up in front of the house. I might have dressed up hurriedly and left his room. But I always wanted it to happen the way it did. Somewhere inside me. I wanted Akin to walk in on us. I wanted to look into his eyes when he did. I wanted to see him explode in some kind of passion. And that Monday, I got exactly what I wanted. When Akin walked in on Dotung and me, I was at once fulfilled and disappointed. I was disappointed because in spite of myself, I still cared about the pain in his eyes. I shut my eyes to gather strength and raised my knees to accommodate Dotung. And the only thing in focus was my husband and what he was seeing. The arch of Dotung's back, the feverish thrust of the hips, the shudder, and the collapse. Akin stood by the door, silent and unmoving until Dotung rolled off me, and yelped when he noticed his brother in the room. Then Akin turned round, locked the door, and slipped the key into his pocket. He removed his jacket, folded it, and laid it on the bed. Then, the fires of hell overflowed their banks and spilled into our bedroom. Part 3. Chapter 31. Ilesha, December 2008. I arrive in Ilesha just before midnight. My driver and I go from hotels to motels, and it seems as if the whole country is in Ilesha this Friday. We do not find any space until we get to Ayeso, the last part of town I would have chosen to stay, because it is so close to your father's house. But I have to sleep somewhere, and I take the only vacant room at Beautiful Gate Guesthouse. I beg the attendant to allow Musa to sleep on the couch in what appears to have been a sitting room before, but now serves as a reception. I am tired, but I cannot sleep. I step out of my room onto the adjoining balcony, and I can see your father's house from here, right across the street, just after the point where the tarred road dips into a valley. It is easy to pick out because, apart from this guest house, it is the only house where the lights are on thanks to a generator. There are several cars parked outside, double parked on the main street. There are people eating on the balcony. There are people everywhere. Although I cannot see the backyard from where I stand, I can see smoke rising from there. I should be there now, keeping vigil over boiling stew, and telling the hired cooks to turn over the sizzling meat before it gets burnt, making sure they start cooking the jollof rice by 5 a.m., yam and stew by 6 a.m., so that everyone can eat before they go to church for the funeral service. It is what wives do. I did it many times. Do you remember? Did you even notice how hard I tried? Why did you invite me for this funeral? How did you even know where I was? I thought you had wiped me off, the way a teacher wipes off old notes from a chalkboard with a duster. Then I got that card in the mail, and the printed words asked me to be the guest of Akinyele Ajayi. I watched the family house, hoping to recognize somebody, at least one of the people that I used to think of as family in this place that I once called home. But it is too far away. I can see people but not their faces, and any of the men could be you. There are still canopies outside. I assume they are from the wake that was held this evening. I had no plans to attend that, to listen to you and your siblings tell carefully crafted lies about your dead father in between hymns. I can imagine the measured words you must have spoken tonight, The platitudes expected from a first son. You would have delivered them well, made some people want to weep. Those who did not know your father would have been tempted to cry their hearts out that the world had lost such a gem at the tender age of 90. Your mother would have, as always, been proud. Since you would have spoken first, none of your siblings would have matched your oratory skills. None of them could, even if they had a year to prepare. I am on the balcony until the lights go off in your father's house. Then I go back into my room and fall asleep at once. I am awake before 6 a.m. The floor feels cold, and chills snake up my legs as I walk to the balcony. It is as though nobody went to bed at your family house. Maybe you closed up the house in Imon and slept here last night. I settle in a plastic chair and watch. I'm in no hurry to get ready, because I will not be attending the church service. The praise singer arrives around 7 with his mini megaphone. He stays on the street and chants, praising first of all Ijesha people, to whom your father belongs. I learned the verses of this oriki just before I married you. Your mother taught me every line she knew, and I memorized them eagerly. She told me to wake you up in the morning on my knees, chanting the lines of your lineage's praise. I chose instead to cling to your body and whisper the words into your ears. But you did not like to listen to poetry in the mornings, or at any time, and it was Chesson who would enjoy my renditions. The chanter is praising your paternal grandmother's family now. They still make my head swell, these words about people who were dead long before we were born. There are tears in my eyes by the time the chanting finally gets to your father's oriki. I do not know if I am crying for myself, you, your father, all the years that have passed, or because the praise singer renders the verses so beautifully. There is a woman standing beside the praise chanter. Her hands are up in the air. I can see she is weeping, shaking her body until her wrapper slips to the floor. She does not pick it up. My hands are cold on my cheeks as I wipe away my tears. There is such loud wailing when your father's coffin, white from where I sit, is brought out of the house. The wails reach a crescendo as the pallbearers hoist the coffin to their shoulders. People stand in 2s or 3s, holding on to each other as though they might collapse under the weight of grief if they do not hold on to somebody. A female voice pierces through the din and reaches me. My father! Is it really over? Are you really leaving us? Won't you wake up? Won't you wave goodbye, my father? My father! The pallbearers begin a march towards the hearse. A lone trumpeter leads the way, playing Shall We Gather at the River? The praise singer, too, continues his chant. Ma jokun, ma jekulu, ontiwo ba jelorun, ni o ma ba onje. The little crowd that is gathered in front of your house disperses. Many climb into the parked cars. The cars begin to move slowly, forming a convoy behind the hearse. A pickup van that has a man hanging out of the window with a video camera on his shoulder is the first to gather speed. The hearse follows, its siren announcing your father's final departure from the neighborhood where he spent most of his adult life. He will not be back here again. After the service, he will be interred in the church cemetery at Ijofi. Several cars follow the hearse, shiny jeeps and SUVs, owned by his children and close relatives. I wait until the last car is gone before going back into my room. I put on my clothes about the time you will be standing by your father's freshly dug grave, surrounded by family and clergy. You will be the first among the children to throw a clump of earth into your father's grave. The wailing will start again, and as you all watch the grave diggers begin to fill up the grave with earth, even the men will become tearful. Couples who have not spoken to each other in weeks will hold hands. I was too shocked to cry at my father's funeral, but you had tears in your eyes, even though you did not let one of them fall. I held your hand while you sniffed and blinked rapidly. Akin, who will hold your hand today if you cry silently? Chapter 32. 1992 onwards.
The first time Dotun had sex with my wife, I stood in front of the bedroom door and wept. It happened on a Saturday. Fumi was visiting relatives or something. I was supposed to be at the sports club. I thought then that I had the capacity to play tennis or drink beer while my brother tried to get Yejide pregnant. I had it all planned so that by the time I got back home, Dotun would have left our room. Yejide would have put on her clothes and I could act as if I didn't know what was going on. But halfway to the club, I turned the car around and drove back home, hoping I would find them in the sitting room, watching something on the television, sitting on opposite sides of the room, thinking it was possible that Yejide wasn't as vulnerable as I'd imagined, that Dotun wasn't as persuasive as I'd believed, and I would have a chance to tell my brother that I'd changed my mind. I wasn't sure about the plan anymore, could no longer bear the thought of his hands on my wife. There was nobody in the sitting room. Could have turned back when I stood in front of our bedroom door, when it became obvious that it was too late to stop what I'd set into motion. I should have gone downstairs, left the house again. But I found that I couldn't move. I felt like my body was suddenly without bones, about to collapse. So I clung to the stainless steel door handle with both hands, pressing my forehead against the door frame. Tears began to slide down my cheeks as I imagined what was happening on the other side of the door. Until that day, the tears I'd shed as an adult had all been because of Yejide. The first time was when she asked me if I thought she was responsible for her mother's death. "I'm sure my mother would still be alive if she had never conceived me," she'd said, twisting a braid around her forefinger. I didn't know what to say, but my body responded to the utter despair in her eyes with a sting of tears in mine. She blinked, and the despair was gone, just like that. Then she smiled and asked me to forget what she'd just said. "Of course it's not my fault. I didn't create my own head," she said, letting the braid go. She moved on to another topic while I rubbed my eyes with the back of my hands. She didn't acknowledge my tears, and I felt as if I'd just witnessed an argument she was having with herself. I realized that she hadn't looked into my eyes because she thought I would give her answers. She had looked in my direction only because I happened to be there. 2 weeks later, her father was dead. At his graveside, I was shocked by how her stepmothers went out of their way to make sure Yejide stood without any family member by her side. They all moved from one side of the grave to another, so that Yejide and I stood alone like outcasts. When I nudged Yejide and asked that we both follow her siblings and stepmothers, she smiled and told me that they'd moved because of her, and if we went to their side, they would all simply move again. Yejide had mentioned before then that her stepmothers made a sport out of ostracizing her, but until that day at the burial, I hadn't thought much about what it must have been like for her to grow up in a family where her only ally was her father. Her father, the man who had told her more than once that the love of his life could have lived forever if only Yejide's head had been smaller when she was an infant, small enough for her mother to push into the world without losing too much blood. The tears I managed to hold back at the funeral were not for Yejide's father. I met the old man just once before he passed on. Tears blurred my vision because of the lonely little girl who had become the woman whose hand I held as she bent over to throw a handful of sand on her father's coffin. Long before I discussed it with him, I knew Dotun would agree to have sex with my wife. Steeled myself ahead of time and assumed that, when it eventually happened, the only emotion I'd have left would be pity for Yejide. She tried to act the part of a good in-law around my brother, but I knew she despised him and thought his wife was unfortunate to have married him. Once, she'd let it slip that she could hardly believe that we were brothers. She didn't explain what she meant, but I knew she was trying to say she believed I was Jekyll, and he was Hyde. I thought I'd pity her for the guilt she'd carry, feel sorry that she had to find comfort in a man she despised. Didn't imagine that Dotun's touch would ever become something she enjoyed. But that Saturday, instead of feeling any emotion for my wife,
I wept because I felt humiliated, hopeless, angry. My tears had nothing to do with Yejide. I didn't give a damn about how she felt that day. Rage coiled itself around my throat like a constrictor, made my eyes water, gave me a sharp pain in my chest each time I took a breath. The tears were gone by the time Dotong stepped out of the room. Shirtless, beads of sweat around his collarbone like a melting necklace. All I had left was the rage that was choking me.
"She's in the bathroom,"
he said, as he shut the door behind him.
"You said you were going to the club. Brother me. Are you okay?"
I turned around then, dashed down the stairs, drove off before Yejide could realize I was back in the house. I spent the rest of the day driving around town, returning when it was almost midnight. Yejide was still awake when I entered our bedroom. I remember thinking as she came to me and put her arms around me that it was the first time I wanted to hurt her, to make her feel pain. My hand shook when I touched her hair. I'd always felt I didn't deserve Yejide, and that day as I opened the bedroom windows to let in some fresh air, I knew I would never become the kind of man who deserved to have her. The next evening, Dotun went back to Yejide upstairs as planned. I drove to Ijesha Sports Club, tried to eat catfish pepper soup. When I got back home, Yejide was in bed, curled up, blubbering about something I couldn't make out. I took off my shirt and singlet, held her while she cried, and talked about how she'd been so sure she'd been pregnant that first time.
"I felt it kick,"
she said. And though all I could think about as I kissed her face was how Dotun had been in that same bed with her earlier that day, I managed to reassure her, told her it was a matter of time before she really conceived. That was all it took to have Olamide. One weekend. The master plan was to have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. Once every other year, Dotun was supposed to spend a weekend with us, get my wife pregnant, and go back to Lagos. I always assumed I was the instigator, the one who decided when it was time for them to go into a room and make babies. After Rotimi was conceived, I decided that it would be cruel to bring another child into the world when it was possible that he or she would go through the kind of pain Shesong had endured. I told Dotun that our arrangement was over, and I never thought that I would return home one day to find him thrusting into my wife without my permission. When I walked in on the 2 of them, the rage that had stayed coiled around my throat since that first Saturday stirred again, tightening its hold. My eyes met Yejide's, and I felt ashamed. The eyes that had once looked at me as though I was all she had in the world now stared at me with contempt. She glared at me as if I was an insect she would like to crush. She made no move to stop Dotun, just turned her head. I realized that while I'd thought my brother and I would trade places once in a while, truth was that from that first Saturday, he'd occupied vistas I'd never even glimpsed. I waited until Dotun rolled off her and saw me. He leapt off the bed. I took off my jacket, took my time, folded it, then placed it on the bed. There was no ready weapon within reach. No pestle, no sharp knife waiting for me to grab. I marched towards Dotun, armed with the only weapons I really needed, my raging anger, my clenched fists.
"Bros Aki! Wait, Bros Aki! Don't let the devil use you! Egbomi! Please, don't be— Wait! The devil's tool!"
Dotun screamed, wrapping a bedsheet around his torso. I laughed, the sand clawing its way out of me, scratching my throat.
"Devil's tool? Me? You bastard!"
I punched his mouth, his nose, his eyes. I felt his skin give way, heard his bones crack, and saw blood flow from his nose. The pounding in my head intensified each time I rammed my fist into Dotun's face. He kept backing away from me, until he tripped on the sheet he'd used to cover himself. He fell, hit his head against Yejide's bedside table on his way down, knocking her lamp over. He landed on his back, and the bedsheet unwrapped itself from his body. I knelt over his bare belly and punched. His neck, his chest, the hands that tried to ward me off. There was blood on my hands. His blood, my blood. The blood seeped into the rug on the floor, spreading into a map-like stain that would never wash out.
I trusted you!
I got off him, kicked his chest until there was a bleeding gash below his nipple. He coughed blood onto the rug, blood and a tooth. The tooth shone in the small red pool. He tried to say something, then coughed and spluttered more blood. It enraged me, the still moist, limp penis between his legs. I thought of where that penis had just been, and a lifetime of rage heated up my head. The images of him, with Yejide, that I'd spent my waking hours fighting for years, pictures that dragged me down in dreams each time my head hit a pillow, broke loose from the cage of denial I'd constructed for them. I knelt between Dotum's spread-eagled legs, grabbed his limp penis, and twisted it. His scream would have deafened me if I'd heard it, but the sound of my head exploding shut out everything else. There were soft hands on my shoulders, pulling me back. I kept twisting.
For God's sake, Akin, don't kill him, please!
Yejide was on her knees beside me, still naked. I took my hands off Dotum.
Shut up, you whore! Me? Akin, me a whore? A dog will eat your mouth for saying that.
Her voice was angry, not pleading. I reached for the knocked-over lamp, yanked its cord out of the socket.
What are you doing?
Yejide's voice was shrill with panic.
Akin!
I lifted the lamp with both hands. Yejide wrapped her hands around my chest, tried to pull me off Dotum.
Akin, Yele, I beg you in the name of God, don't let the devil use you.
Dotum tried to sit up, covering his eyes with his hands. I hit him on the chin with the lamp, knocked him back to the ground. Yejide said something, but all I could hear was the pounding in my head, the sound of glass cracking. I smashed the lampshade against his head, shattered its glass panels and low-watt bulbs against his scalp until he was still. I got up, cradling what was left of the lamp against my chest.
You have killed your brother,
Yejide whispered behind me.
You've murdered your own mother's son.